philosopher.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo, also known as Ricky France, and a great episode for you today. Philosopher, historian, author, podcaster, Daniele Bolelli returns to the show. I know since last time he's been on, I have a lot of new listeners, so go back, check out the archives, check out the episodes he's been on. Daniele Bolelli, if you're not familiar with him, he has two podcasts, one called A History on Fire, which is pretty similar to Dan Carlin's podcast in regards to focuses on a specific historical event or person or story. And then he has the Drunken Taoist, which is more like this podcast where you have a guest on. Sometimes it's just him and his co-host. They chat and really fun, casual conversation, and they talk about everything and anything similar to this show. He's always been somebody that I enjoy talking to because I always leave the conversation feeling better and learning something. And something that I've said on the show a bunch of times, which he said during one of the previous appearances on the show, information for information's sake is useless. Information should be useful. It should be for the purpose of helping you understand yourself or the world around you, and just being able to regurgitate information. There's no value in that. When I had a lot of insecurities about my ability to hold a conversation with somebody who's a PhD or a historian or a thinker, somebody who makes a living off their knowledge and information and perspectives, remembering that little lesson, that little piece of information that Daniele shared with me, his just perspective on information in general, it helped me a lot because it made me think like, wow, yeah, I mean, I might not know as many historical things as this historian, or I don't understand science to the extent that this person does, but I can understand why it's important. It definitely helped. So he probably doesn't even know that, and I probably should have shared that with him, but I didn't. Hopefully he'll listen to the intro and he hears that. But with that said, also, if you guys want to support the show, I am attempting to do this whole value for value thing. So if you get value out of this show, which I know many of you guys do, think about supporting the show either via financially, our Patreon page, PayPal. We also have a PayPal account if you want to support us that way, if you want to tip the show, or just rate the show. Any of those things can help get the word out, help promote the show, and anybody who does, I truly appreciate it. I've read a lot of really positive, awesome comments and reviews, and I can't thank you guys enough for taking the time out of your day to do that, because I myself, I'm guilty of procrastinating for a long period of time in regards to finally reviewing or rating a show and helping them out in that manner. So if you can do that, great. I also have a merch store, the Ripple Effect Podcast, merch.com. All the links will be in the show description. I'm also now on Float, Odyssey, BitChute. I think that's about it for alternative platforms. And obviously I'm on all of the major ones, Instagram, Twitter, Facebook. I have a Ripple Effect Podcast Facebook page, but I also have a personal page if you want to connect with me on there. Just send me a message to let me know you're not a bot and we can connect. And what else? And okay, so Patreon. In the past, what I've been doing is I've been letting you know in advance who's going to be on the show and people I'm booking or whatnot. And that's usually what I do to give them some type of incentive to support the show on Patreon, is I'll let you know who I'm booking. But what I'm starting to ponder on is the idea of doing a solo podcast on Patreon and putting out the Zoom link on Patreon for any of my Patreon supporters to join in on the conversation, basically do a podcast with whoever participates. You actually get to be a part of the conversation. You get to be on the podcast. We get to chat about whatever shows you like, don't like, what's going on in the world, whatever it may be. Anybody who's a Patreon supporter can see the link and jump in and be a part of the show. So that's what I'm thinking of doing. Let me know, guys, if you think that's a good idea or bad idea, if you guys would participate. So let me know if that's something you guys might be intrigued with, interested in, and maybe that's what we'll do. And maybe we'll do it really soon if I get a lot of positive feedback. So with that said, enjoy the show. This intro's been long enough, and I will see you guys on the next one. I believe
What's up?
How are you?
Good. What's going on?
Long time no see.
What's happening in your world?
It seems like the same thing's happening to all of us. We're all just living in some weird conspiracy theory movie.
Yeah, it's weird. Who would have guessed?
Yeah. Well, I guess, a lot of times when these things happen, initially, I think that was many of our reactions was like, wow, I mean, how could you have prepared for this? And then as more information saw the light of day, you start seeing things like, Event 201 and all these things that you're like, maybe they could have prepared for this a little better. And maybe they were aware of something like this happening and had much more information they shared with us. But it's been a wild year. I don't know what exactly is the most frustrating part to you, or what, the pros and cons of the year. I mean, there has been some pros, believe it or not. I think for content creators, it's been, even for myself, I've had more interaction with fans than ever, because a lot of people just, they feel like they live in a twilight zone, and just hearing real people have discussions about things you want to talk about in a civil manner, I think it was refreshing. And initially, I think that's what drew us all to podcasts in the first place. I started in 2013, and you started before I did. So I think a lot of people were attracted to the fact that it's like, oh, wow, this is a place where I can just hear people chat the way I chat with my friends, and the same way. And it's funny because I remember my co-host Dave, which you did shows with us back in the day, and he the concept seemed so weird to him. Like, wait, we're just going to talk and people and record it and people are going to listen to it. And I remember telling Dave, I'm like, listen, when we go out and we laugh, we share ideas, we challenge each other's ideas and perspectives, and we go home at the end of the night like, wow, that was really fun. I'm like, the way that was fun for us, I'm like, it's the same type of experience for the listener, and we all become a part of this journey of kind of molding our opinions and perspectives while having these conversations, which is why I think long form conversation is so powerful.
Of course, definitely. No, it's interesting for sure. It's tricky too, because on one end, you're absolutely right. You have that factor going on. On the other end, because there are a bunch of people working from home, and, be driving in a car was the primary mode of listening to podcasting, that has gone down. So there's, I think, even in terms of the podcasting factor, it probably goes both ways.
Yeah, that's actually a really good point, because when I got into podcasting or listening to podcasts, when I really got into them, was because a lot of it, I think, was because of me commuting a lot. I mean, that contributed a huge amount, because I had 2 hours, 3 hours on the road daily where I could really catch up on podcasts. I know people who tell me I just don't have time to listen to them, and I'm like, you know what? It's sometimes when you're just doing chores, when you're just doing stuff around the house. I mean, it's the thing about listening to a conversation compared to listening to music, and it sucks because I grew up being a musician or playing music and writing music and all that stuff, and I still love music, but I got so obsessed with just hearing ideas and perspectives and these conversations, and it was great for killing time, because you would have to listen to a whole album to make an hour go by. I mean, you can listen to a 2-3 hour conversation and it feels like minutes. You're like, wait, it's already an hour later or 2 hours later. It's the same way where, I mean, I'm a talker, as you know. So like I go somewhere and, next thing you know, I'm chit chatting with somebody and like, oh shit, I gotta go. Like, so it's kind of the same experience, but, listening to the conversation. I remember being at my destination and like, I want to know where this conversation is going. I kind of want to stay in the car for a little bit because I want to see where is this going to go. So, and with my longer podcast, it's similar to Rogan's or your show where you do longer conversations, sometimes the best part of the conversation is at the very end. It just leads there, where I'm just like, I hope people, held on till the very end of this podcast, because I think that was kind of the best part of the conversation.
Right. No, definitely. That sometimes it happens. And yeah, Rogan has been man, it's been insane. Like, because yeah, back then, especially when he started, 3-4 hour conversation is like, man, it takes some stamina.
Yeah, it does. But I think sometimes if you're really into it, if you're, sometimes the time just flies by. And so this year, I mean, the thing is, I love having people on like yourself who has like this historical perspective. You can kind of look at things because, I remember initially, I'm like, wow, man, we always say we live in the craziest of times. And I think this time we're probably correct. But and then I remember I had somebody, I think it was a guest who's like, what about the Black Plague? What about this? What
Yeah.
about, I'm like, that's kind of a pretty valid point. If we're growing up in those times, we'd probably be thinking like, this is even worse than what people in 2020 are living through. How has this year been for you? Like, what's your perspective on everything? Do you see some trends or something where you do feel like there's going to be this global, I guess, reset, for lack of a better term, because that's been the popular term of late? And it does kind of seem like that. But before I guess I share any of my perspectives, let's get into your perspectives on kind of how you feel about 2020, and is something bigger happening?
I mean, part of it, it's very hard to tell where it's going because while sure there are historical precedents and the reality is that we live in a world that's completely different from the way we did in the past. It's like even think Black Plague, which of course is 3 million times worse than coronavirus from a epidemiological level. And yet at the same time, you lived in a universe in which most people produce their own food, most people were tied to the land, most people could just kind of, okay, you're done, you just don't see too many people, you hang out on your farm and on that plot of land, and that's kind of what you did. Today, that's not the way it is. We live in an interconnected world. The speed of travel, movement, ideas, opinions, everything is instantaneous. So there really is no way to compare in that sense because it's a completely different setup, which also means it's very hard to figure out where it's going because you can't really base it on solid historical evidence, say, oh, this is exactly like what happened then, so you can predict where this is going. No, you really can't because the conditions are completely different from the way they were in the past. So that's what makes this a very, who knows kind of thing.
I think a lot of people that they have that feeling, and that's why I think a lot of people have been kind of just going with what they've been told, or going with the wearing masks and being extra careful because they're like, well, I'm not sure what to believe, so I throw my hands up, and
Mhm.
I'm just like, I'm just gonna stay on the safe side. My problem with that though is, and I've lost a cousin this year. I know you've also had some stuff lost. I don't know how much
Sure,
publicly you want to talk about it, but you lost a loved one
sure.
this year too. And the big thing is, and I have kids like I have a 5-year-old and a 4-year-old, and it's just like this whole idea of like, oh, we'll just wait it out, just wait, oh, a little longer, we'll do it a
Right.
little, oh, until the vaccine, no, until this, until that, until and it's like lives are being ruined. There's trauma that we're not even aware of right now that's going on in regards to children, adults, all this stuff. And we keep pretending that tomorrow's guaranteed. And that's the part that really rubs me the wrong way the most, is the fact that it's like, wait, you do understand, like, for some people tomorrow isn't guaranteed.
Sure.
We can't just hold out and really, people who are regardless like where people stand on the evidence, or how lethal or not lethal the virus is. I mean, it's pretty common knowledge now that if you're healthy, fairly younger person, you're not really at risk. But all these rules and regulations, those are the people that are hurting the most, and that's my problem with what's going on.
Well, and I think what's funny too is that we treat it like there is no clear path for how to deal with it. Look at Taiwan, look at Japan, look at like bunch of Asian countries. I've number of cases are ridiculously low. their situation is completely different. So it's, to me, it's kind of like, look, it's not like everybody's dealing with it the same way and getting the same results. Look at the countries that are having success, and some countries are objectively having success. It's not like the ones that it's kind of ambiguous. Oh, they opened and it went well. Yeah, but then they had more cases. Oh, but then, it's not that. It's pretty clear cut where some countries are having success. Can you do whatever it is they are doing in other places? Yes, no, why? It's a pretty straightforward approach, but that's not typically the discussion you're having. Like, I hardly ever see, even in the arguments in the pro or against or anything, I don't see that much references to places like, for example, a whole bunch of Asian countries that are having tremendous success in dealing with it.
Yeah, I know in Portugal they went to court in regards to the PCR test because they were saying it's not fair to lock somebody down for 7 days or whatever 2 weeks it may be. I mean that's half of people's salary for the month, and when those bills come, you have no support, you have no help, but yet you had to stay home for a PCR test, which isn't really a test, it's a method, and can find such insignificant amount of a virus that it really all this asymptomatic conversation, a lot of it could be because it's just insignificant amount of the virus, and the guy who created it said it's not designed for what for these type of purposes. He passed away late last year, but you can find videos of him discussing it, and so now you look at Portugal, you can't shut people or have people quarantine for a PCR test. And, I'm more worried about like, small businesses. My wife's a bartender and waitress. I mean, they've been hit so hard, and like you look at like Massachusetts where I live, not too long ago, they mandated masks in public. They mandated masks regardless if you're by yourself, if you're with friends, if you're hiking, you need them in public. They just started a curfew, where now it's like everything has to be shut down at 9:30. I mean, obviously in the restaurant business, that's huge. People like to go out to eat sometimes at 8 o'clock. They're not going to go out to eat if they can't get there earlier because they're like, well, we're going to get kicked out before we finish our meal. People stick around and drink, all this stuff. And there's no science behind any of this. There's just like before it was 6 feet away. Now it's 6 feet. Now it's if you're not 6 feet away, wear a mask. And now it's like wear one in public by yourself, regardless if you're around anybody. So it definitely seems like it's getting to the point where it's more and more obvious. This is about, I mean, people are just, it's about flexing their muscles. It's government overreach. I have friends of mine that are police officers, and they'll tell you about the police stations are even getting kickbacks in regards to getting more money from this stuff. Obviously hospitals and all this stuff. And the weird thing to me too is just like how the right and the left have, it's become like, I feel like this election and this year in general has separated people more than ever. And it's weird because I'm like, we should all, weren't we all kind of fighting for the same things? Like, we know big pharma's bad. We know, like, a lot of people in the left, which, I've had Dennis McKenna on multiple times talking about plant medicines and all this stuff, and how the government, didn't have our health in mind when they were making cannabis illegal, when they were making kratom, fighting against kratom and all these plant medicines that could help. So it's like, why do we think now that like they're moral and they care about us? Or why do we, when we talk about the oxycodone epidemic, which was killing young people and almost exclusively young people at times, uh, we knew big pharma was bad, but now we think like big pharma's here to help us and protect us from a virus. And it's just like, can't we all just come together on these issues? But what happened was, like, your opinion on a mask or your opinion on any of these topics became a political football, where it's just like, oh, you're not, it's the mask, where you stand on the mask has nothing to do with the science behind it or lack of science or whatever, or if it's government overreach, but it has to do with your political stand. So I wore one if I was on the left. I refused to wear one if I was on the right. And it's like, it created this incredible separation. I know, like, every election year, you kind of get that. You get like, the country seems torn apart. But this year definitely seemed worse than other years. Would you agree with that, you think?
Yeah, I mean, I think it became the situation in which it's not about arguing in good faith about anything. It's extremely black and white, polarized, 100%, purely on ideological lines. An ideology, almost by definition, is a mental disease. It's something that makes you plug, like a really kind of like, to me, is, I give you an example, like on what we're talking about the public health, do you close, do you not close, mask, no mask, all of that. The line tend to be pretty drawn in the sand, as you say, along political lines. To me, it would be more honest to have discussions that are ranging various options. So let's say, for example, maybe one think the closures and stuff are not where it should be, right? Okay, fine. Okay, let's make the argument rather than being public health officials, and then it gets framed against you're either against public health or you are pro individual rights. It's like, how about, let's say that you want to make an experiment saying that it's important to have a complete closure, all of that. Fine, do it. Pay people, pay people to stay home. Give people 6 months of salary to stay home. And do all the closure you want for 6 months where nobody goes. You see where I'm going? Is like, to me, is like, there are various options there. And unfortunately, usually the way people are framing it is that if they are on one side of the equation, they will be that way 100% without considering an alternative and vice versa. To me, it's like, look, it's real simple. There's shit that works, there's shit that doesn't. Some of it we don't know because it hasn't been around long enough. Some of it we do know because there are countries that have been doing very well with it. Try experiments and then be ready to drop them when they don't work. Okay, give it 2 months in a certain way. Does it work? Is it leading to better results or not? Okay, if it does, let's tweak it and keep going. It doesn't, change and try another one. And instead, rather than being sort of evidence-based and ready to change your mind based on whatever evidence comes in, it does become this very ideological thing to the death, and it is all about, it's like, Jesus Christ. Unfortunately, it's that way with everything, it's that way with politics, it's that way, like even like if you think about the debates, capitalism versus socialism, even those are retarded because it's like, think about it, you just have there's no system in the world that's 100% capitalist, and there's no system in the world currently that's 100% communist, hardcore, full control of the state. It's all a mix. So you're not arguing about one is good, one is bad, you're arguing on percentages, so you're arguing about where you draw the line. So if we're arguing about where you draw the line, that's not an ideological debate. That's a tweak it. Oh, we went a little too far this way. You should bring it back a little that other route. That's a debate that's so much easier to have because it's not one that's based on good guys, bad guys. It's based on tweaking something until you find the right balance that works. But of course, that's not a debate that pretty much anybody has. It's all about slogans and colors and your political tribe and all that shit. And it's just, it's one of the things where it's like, why do we do it? I think because people crave dogma. People crave ideology, regardless of what they say that they do or they don't, because it gives you a sense of identity. It gives you a sense of order in a chaotic world. It gives you a sense of, I have my solution, I have my slogan that I'm going to follow no matter what. Like, this is the position we're going to take. This is our stance. We'll keep going. Rather than having to do the really hard job, which is to constantly, kind of like a surfer, you have to change balance constantly depending on the waves. Rather than doing that and figuring out, oh, turns out we went a little too far this way. Now bring it back a little. Now we went a little too far the other way. Bring it back. And constantly doing the game, which is hard, of course. It takes work. It takes being smart. It takes a lot of things. It's so much easier to just buy into a slogan, somebody sell you an ideology where they promise you that it would be utopia if it wasn't just for the bad guys on the other side of the political equation who stand in the way of everything that's good and holy. And let's just yell at them and because that's going to be really productive. And eventually, if you follow our path, it will lead to some utopia. That's why cults are popular. That's why dictators are popular. That's why ideologies are popular. Because to me, anything, if taken too far, become an ideology. It's like even for example, in Taoism has an interesting thing where it's like most of the time people who read political Taoism as being very anti-government because they argue that the ideal government is the least possible amount of government. True and not true. Meaning, yes, it's true. That's exactly what they say, and that's what it means. However, in some cases, the least amount of government may still be a lot of government because it's the least amount necessary to get the job done, right? So even that is not a dogma in the sense that it's not a hard line of the answer is always small in every situation. Yeah, it's always small in every situation, except for the one case in which big works better. You know what I mean? But that requires to be very much on your toes constantly, to be very much ready to switch. Whereas again, a fixed ideology, easy to stick to it because no matter what reality shows you, you still go with the original plan and you never have to think twice about it.
Yeah, I mean, the thing that you said is so important in regards to capitalism and socialism and all these things because I talk to people who will use those words without really understanding them, and people will be like, "Yeah, well, we're going to be in a socialist country," and I'm like, "Well, you're not in 100% capitalist country.
Right.
What do you think you're in, anyways? Because
Yeah.
it's a mixture." So
Sure.
these words sound. Well, the funny thing is, I was actually debating with a police officer who was working on detail. I work construction, and he was, and he's a friend of mine, so it was a friendly debate. But he's like, downplay, just talking about socialism, and I'm like, hey, you do realize like your job is kind of a socialist idea, like the idea that society comes together for a service. We all contribute for the service, and you're one of those services. So this idea that, like you said, what you're really debating is how much of one or how much of the other do and that might change, from one person to another. They might think that maybe we need less socialist ideas, more capitalist ideas, and that would be better. But it's also important, I think, to have those debates, even though I think you're right. I mean, it's similar to like the atheist religious debates where like you're not going to convert the priest who's debating the atheist, and you're probably not going to convert the atheist. So it becomes more of like a pissing contest where just like, let's just see who can make the other one look worse or stump the other person, which doesn't necessarily even mean that you won the debate based on good information or, some logical good debate or argument. But I think it is important to sometimes have those debates because I've learned from like hearing capitalist and socialist debate and hearing their critiques of the other one, you get to kind of figure out what the flaws are in them. So like I've had Professor Richard Wolff on, who is, he's kind of well known for his knowledge of Karl Marx and Marxism and all this stuff. And his critiques of capitalism, I think, are absolutely intriguing because they exist. He's right, and that there are flaws. And just like there's capitalists who will debate, the issues with socialism. And I think that's right. But one thing we will learn from history is a lot of these debates have been going on forever. They've never been really settled. And even like the universal healthcare in the U.S., you hear from people in Europe who talk about how the same debates that are being made or same arguments that are being made in America for why they think it wouldn't work are the exact same ones that they made back then when they were proposing it in Europe. And so it's like these things, and you see it over and over again. If you watch old debates with, Rob or JFK and Nixon and whatever, I mean, they're literally saying the same shit they're feeding us today. It's like, we're for the middle class. We're going to be out of wars. We're going to be, all this stuff. So it's interesting when you kind of go through history and you realize how much of this stuff has been just kind of regurgitated over and over again.
Absolutely. And I think the problem, though, is that it's like the evidence doesn't matter because they are not good faith debates. They are not based on, hey, if you show me a better way, hey, turns out that's a good idea. I'm going to borrow it. Why is it that in debates, nobody ever changed their mind? Ever. They continue on forever. I mean, okay, sure, there's the occasional your friend once in a while who can do that. But for the most part, that's not how it works. And that's because they are not good faith debates. They are influenced by commitment to an ideology, and they are influenced by ego that, no, I need to be right, rather than I couldn't care less about being right. It's about give me something that helps make life better. that's not the way discussions are entered. They are not entered with let's find something, let's together toss ideas until we figure out, it doesn't even matter if it's your idea or mine, but we figure out what is that actually make life better or solve a problem. Is my viewpoint needs to win, either because my identity depends on it, because I've invested so much into this ideological construct, or because my ego is too fragile to admit that maybe I don't have all the answers. But either way, that's how discussions take place. They are not done in a way to be like, turns out maybe I don't agree with everything you said, but hey, you got a good point, and actually tweaking my perspective by 20% actually makes it way better. That would be honest, that would be straightforward. But again, good luck finding that.
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. I mean, I've been interviewed on other shows where they'll ask me a question, and in the process of answering where I think I stand on that question, I will find myself remolding it and re-observing it. And then I'm like, this is kind of where I stand, but I'm like, my opinion's changing while I'm answering this. And I think that's so important. Like, just don't be married to any ideas, because I mean, when I'm wrong, it means I'm a little bit closer to being right. I'm a little bit closer to learning something new and figuring out that maybe I stood in the wrong place. That's why I love bouncing ideas off people, because I'm always really like interested in, like, okay, we don't agree on this, but why don't you agree on this? Like, what brought you here? And then try to analyze, like, okay, well, did I really think this out? One thing I think a lot of podcasters get from doing podcasts is the fact that throughout interviewing people or just talking and putting out verbally, trying to get your ideas and perspectives out, you are observing them and molding them and reflecting on them at the same time. So it's not just a journey for the listener, but it's a journey for everybody. And we're literally, I mean, there's times where I've stood, I'm like, okay, this is where I stand on this idea, or I really subscribe to that philosophy or that idea. And then I go to verbalize and I'm like, okay, I didn't really think this out correctly. Or maybe I never really thought it out. It just seemed like it made sense. I jumped on that boat, I'm on that team. And then all of a sudden I'm saying it out loud and I'm like, I'm like, maybe I should rethink this, So do you find that also, that like throughout these discussions, your opinions and perspectives are constantly changing?
Yeah, and I think that's important to do that, to play that game, because again, it's not about attachment to one's opinion or about being right. It's completely secondary to me. It's like, even like, think about it in maybe personal discussions with loved ones. If it's a loved one, hopefully you don't just want to smash them in the head and just get your point across at all costs. You just want something that eventually makes both of you happy.
Good luck.
And rather than approaching it that way, just like, look, I don't care, fuck. It's like, whatever. Like, we can. I have zero attachment to the idea that I just told you. I have the attachment to us being happy. Let's figure out how that works. Okay, maybe I'm not seeing what you're saying, but let's try it for a little bit. Let's see if it works. And then if it doesn't, we go back and try something else. That would be, think about how many arguments, even on a personal level, are avoided if one does that, if one just approaches it in that fashion, rather than being an ego-driven thing where it's like, people, unfortunately, we are addicted to wanting to be right. We are addicted to all this, and it makes for really poor communication and makes for really poor problem solving. And you see that even in science, because theoretically science is about, gathering evidence, looking at the evidence, formulating conclusion based on the evidence. So there should be no ideology and no ego. But of course, humans are humans, so they'll find a way to stick ideology and ego in anything. And so something that should be pretty straightforward, now it's not, because it's filtered through certain lenses that are. And I find it very tricky. I find that even when, like, I understand why it happens, because there's also a reward for going in a certain direction. If you are clearly aligned, whether religious or atheist, or for a particular political doctrine or another, or any of the things that people build up tribes around, you are automatically have a whole lot of people who are going to support you, who are going to listen to you, who are going to tell you that you're great. If you are more nuanced, you don't. Because the same person who like you when you say thing A suddenly doesn't like you when you're saying things B. The people who are actually enjoy the process of nuance, even though the odds are extremely high that somebody who's nuanced, you're not going to agree with them every time because they are not going with a playbook. That's always a much smaller percentage. That's why if you want to write a book, for example, publishers will ask you, who's your target audience? And you're thinking just being human is a target. It's like if it's for life, it's like, nope, there has to be a very particular faction that's going to support you. So you're the atheist guy. Okay, good. We got the atheist market. Or you are the Christian fundamentalist, or you're the liberal Christian, or you are the whatever the hell, right? But you need to have your label that we can put on you, because the second people read the label, they're going to jump on it, because you're going to have a bunch of people who hate you, but who cares? As long as you have that solid support, that's what counts. That's the game.
Yeah, I mean, the thing about science is that we humans are and it's what you're saying is so important, because we put people on these pedestals because of the career that they pursue. They're a professor, they're a doctor, they have a PhD, they whatever it may be, and we like to think that they're, or even a police officer, like this idea that if you go to court, it's like, oh, it's a police officer's word against yours. Like, what the fuck does that mean? Like, oh, because he chose to be a police officer and I'm a construction worker, I don't have a good moral compass? Or you just automatically assume he has a better moral compass? It's silly, and I apologize for this glare. It was cloudy when we started, and now all of a sudden the sun's coming out. It's right in my face. But yeah, I mean, we put these people on this pedestals, and they're not immune to desires, to ego, temptation, all these things. And so I think it's really important. It reminds me of that Yale experiment, the one, what was his name? No, it wasn't Stanley. It was whatever his, I think his last name started with the M. The one where they had the guy shocking somebody behind the curtain, and they had to answer a question. And every time they shocked them, they would have to go up on a voltage. And I'm doing a horrible job explaining this. So basically, you had this guy who's a part of the experiment, and he was asked to give questions, and every time somebody behind this curtain answered it incorrectly, they would shock them, and then every time they get it wrong, they would go up on the voltage. Well, the person behind the curtains was actually a part of the experiment and was pretending he was severely getting hurt and injured and whatnot. And the idea of the experiment was to see how authority can get you to do something maybe against your will. Or a lot of people now are talking about how these conversations we would have, like, hey, if you lived in Nazi Germany, would you go along with society? Would you go along with the herd? Would you do it and get caught up in that philosophy or whatnot? And I think all these things are important because we're kind of a part of a similar experiment right now, where people are doing stuff not because logically it makes sense, but because maybe somebody they think is at a higher authority is telling them to do so. You look at Governor Newsom when he was telling people, like, hey, put your mask up when you're chewing and only put it down when you're eating, and don't get together with your friends and loved ones and all this stuff. And then he gets caught at the most expensive restaurant in the world in Napa, eating with his friends and enjoying life. It almost like F you to everybody else. He doesn't even believe the same shit he's telling everybody else. But yet because he's a governor and he was an elected official, you assume like, oh, he should have a moral compass and we should trust him, and he wouldn't, he wouldn't tell us to do something if it wasn't necessary. And I think it really, and I think schooling has a big part in that. I think it's much easier to raise kids who just follow the rules, don't ask questions, but you're not raising great humans that way. And I get in this debate with my wife all the time. Gina and I will talk about how she's like, you know what, you shouldn't have him, go against the grain so often, because it really makes it hard. I'm like, yeah, but if I can't give him a logical explanation on why I want him to do something, then maybe I should rethink why I'm having him do it in the first place.
Sure. No, totally. And I think part of the trick is this, is that on one end you have blind obedience to authority, which of course is by almost definition is a problem. On the other hand, you have the fact that clearly not having blind obedience to authority is better. However, it's better only in the measure that you come up with something that's better than whatever the authority is telling you. And so sometimes you have people who are making the right step, who are like, okay, I'm going to disobey authority because you have seen, especially since from the 1960s forward, as more and more evidence piled up that no, politicians usually don't have your best interest at heart. No, what's going on behind the curtain is really dirty, nasty, and ugly. And, people have been sensitized to that, thankfully. But the reaction has been then to not only distrust every single one of them, like every single politician is evil, every single authority figure is evil in that regard, but also just the destruction of traditional authority works great if it makes room for creating something better. The destruction of traditional authority does not work so great if it makes room for nothing, if it makes room for just random chaos where people are just lost and don't know what to do. So I think part of the, why is it that people are so willing to give in to authority? Because they don't have a solution. Because if it was up to them, they would have no damn clue what the solution would be. So a bullshit solution sometimes feels better than a no solution because it's like, hey, at least there's a plan. May not be a great plan, but at least there's a plan. Whereas if the moment you get rid of authority, which again, I personally think, great, good step. Okay, now what are you going to do? What are you going to be your solution? And suddenly people panic because, of course, it's so much easier to talk shit and point the finger about the evil politician than it is about them taking responsibility in a way that produces good results. That's why a lot of revolutions fail, because everybody agree as long as it's about taking down the evil tyrant. Great, good step. Okay, now the evil tyrant is gone. Now it's up to you to create something good. And it's like, oh, shit, it was so much easier to destroy something bad than it is to create something good. And suddenly you see that the alternatives are not necessarily that much better. The many people who were loudly and rightfully screaming about the tyrant don't have really that much better ideas when it comes to them implementing something that works. And that's why I think, again, cult leaders are popular, dictators are popular, authority figures are popular, because most people struggle coming up with something that makes life work well. That's why most people have daddy issues where they want some parental strong figure who tell them, oh, everything is going to be okay, I'm taking care of it, just be my minion and go along and do this. Is because otherwise, if you don't have that, that means you got to take responsibility for your choices, for the outcome of your choices. And that's a hard process. I mean, take 99% of people out there who are rightfully, by the way, complaining about political authority. Put them in charge of something. I can almost guarantee that the results are not going to be any better than they were against the horrible person they were railing about. So that's where, to me, it gets tricky. Is like, yeah, we are, we can agree how to limit the damage of how certain things are just flat out terrible. But the really important question is, okay, what replaces them? What's the process that leads to a better outcome? Because talking about the stuff that doesn't work, yeah, sure, we can agree, no problem. It's the stuff that works that's much more complicated.
Yeah.
I forget, I'm butchering because I don't remember it and I don't have it in front of me, but there was a line by Nietzsche that was about, I'm paraphrasing, but basically along the lines of saying, who cares about free from what? I want to hear what you're free for. It's like, yeah, we can agree that the chains that bind you are bad. But okay, when you get rid of the chains, are you going to do something useful with it? Are you going to do something good? Or we got it. And I think that's an important discussion to have, which again is not one that we normally have because it's so much harder. Talking shit about the powers that be maybe 100% correct, but it's also too easy because it's like, yeah, okay, we agree, great. Now what? And unfortunately, I think that's where things get tricky, where it's not like why so many problems are so hard to solve because they are not that damn easy to tackle. And I think that applies to a lot of things. And that's where that's why even political, if you look at it, it's been an interesting process, because there has been the distrust for traditional politicians. Great, because we have seen how traditional politicians tend to be awful. And this has led progressively more and more in the direction of picking people who have absolutely either minimal or zero experience in politics. So, for example, in 2012, Obama would have been a senator for 2 years, really small political experience compared to most people who have been president. And then you roll into 2016 and you have the choice between either a bunch of professional politicians on the Republican Party or Hillary Clinton on the other, who all represent the old model. Come along Trump, who's just talking crazy shit nonstop and obviously doesn't fit the mold of the traditional guy. So people are like, yay, populist thing. At the same time, Clinton was barely squeaking through going against Sanders, who, sure, he has been a politician forever, but doesn't really fit the mold in so many ways. And the dude is like, 502 years old, openly atheist and openly socialist, which, if you want to make sure to never get elected, those are the things you say, right?
Yeah, but isn't that why I think Sanders supporters and Trump supporters actually saw eye to eye on a lot of things and had a lot in common? Because they saw eye to eye, maybe not in personal philosophies or that type of thing or policies, but they saw eye to eye in regards to, we know that traditional cookie cutter politician, like you said, is not what we want. So
Sure.
Sanders, even though he was a politician, his philosophies, opinions, perspectives were drastically different than everybody else in his political party. So he seemed like the left's version of Trump.
And you're right in terms of what they are against, but then again, that's the other part, right? And when it comes to what they are for, they couldn't be any more different, right? Because the solutions they propose are radically different from one another. And I think that was the Dan Carlin dilemma, that he always wanted to have an outsiders come into power, and then he got Trump, and he's like, oh shit, that's not what I meant, not that kind of an outsider. And so now American politics are at a place, and I mean, we've seen it play out with the last election, where it could really go two ways. It could either go the experiment of the non-traditional politicians. Some people consider it so catastrophic that they're like, okay, give me some traditional corrupt politician. At least I know how bad it can get. There's a limit to it. Or might as well double down and we push even more in that direction. And, Kim Kardashian for president is next, because that's the logical trajectory post-Trump. And it's one of the things where it's like, good luck finding a good solution, because you typically have either absolutely terrible non-traditional people or absolutely terrible traditional people. Both models are awful, and it's one of the things where it's like, enjoy that. Good luck with those choices. And unfortunately, that's the gig right now, where there's a very understandable cynicism toward the corruption of traditional politics. We agree 100%. But it's not that clear that just because somebody is not a traditional corrupt politician, what you get is something good. And that leaves a lot of problems.
Well, I think, okay, so it might not be necessarily something good, but it's something different. And we know that the same old always gives us the same old outcomes of more wars, more lack of privacy and security. And I mean, politicians are run by the lobbyists that pay them, the think tanks that give them money, all these other influencers that are behind the scenes. I've had Jack Abramoff on my show, the lobbyist, not a great guy, but at least he's willing to talk about how he used the system in his benefit to kind of let people know, like, okay, this is how rigged of a game this is,
Sure.
and same thing with, you look at a lot of people in politics, if not all of them in politics, will tell you, like, hey, this is all a facade. It's an illusion.
Sure.
It's you look at, like, but this is how primitive we are still. I think you look at, like, we can talk about, like you said, a politician. Oh, he had a great speech. Oh, how powerful he sounded, and presidential, and he sounded like a leader. But yet we know that speech was written and analyzed by people who know exactly which terms to use, how to use them, what not to say, how, all these things, to, like you said, the same way that somebody would tell you when, or a publisher would say, hey, who are you trying to, who are your fans? It's same thing with the politician, like, hey, we want to make these people happy, so we have to say it like this or avoid saying that. So it's like, we know it's all illusion, but yet we still fall for it. It's almost like when we know like breasts are fake, but they're like, hey, they still turn me on, so I don't care. It's like,
I think the point is, what's the alternative? Because sometimes, think about I don't know, Cambodia 1970s. The government is weak. They are getting their ass kicked with Americans bombing illegal in Cambodia left and right. The government can do nothing to protect them. It's probably, there's tradition of corruption and not taking care of people. So it's crap. Okay, it's complete crap. And then people are like, we need some alternative, and whatever alternative, as long as it's not the traditional system, it must be good. And so then you get the Khmer Rouge. And then you go, oh shit, give me back the old traditional politicians that at least didn't massacre 1/3 of the country. Maybe the old corruption is better than this crap. And of course, it's a horrible thing to say, because the old corruption is a terrible system. But sometimes just because it's not the old corruption doesn't mean it's better. In some cases, it's even like you discover that there are layers to hell. And sometimes the layers, it could be better. And that's nice, because, when you start with a pretty bad level, the hope is that if you get rid of that, then there's room for it to be better. Definitely, there's also room for it to be worse. And that's why it's a delicate game. And I think that's the problem. That, it's very easy to see the problems with the system. It's very hard to come up with a better system.
Yeah, no, that definitely is the problem. I mean, I will, I'm not a Trump supporter by any stretch. I think that it happens that during this whole lockdown, that people who supported Trump had a lot of similar views than I did, as I did, and I see them out in the streets and being vocal about the same things that I happen to agree with. But America's a unique situation, because we've had multiple election years where just like you get to pick, basically it's the same person. It doesn't matter who wins, it's the same person. Policy doesn't really change that much. The bankers, the military industrial complex, all these things have been running the show and really influencing us into wars and all these other things. This is the first time, and that we, like you said, he's not necessarily better than the other alternatives, but to have somebody actually, I think I hate to say it, he kind of red pilled a lot of people. I mean, I think a lot of people who were like, okay, because you look at like the news, for example, we always kind of knew, like you had Fox News, you had MSNBC, they kind of balance each other out. And we know there's this political game that happens when Fox News is interviewing a liberal, or if there's a liberal president, then they're going to go hard on them and then go easy on the Republicans, and vice versa at MSNBC. But we pretend that they're news organizations and there's not political agendas behind the scenes. And yet, to have somebody go out on TV and say, and I know some people don't like him calling things fake news or whatnot, but I think it was like, hey, people, like, he's just saying what we all know, that like there is political agendas. This is all theater. This person's asking this question in this manner because they do want to get a specific type of answer that they could blow up and make it front page news. And so in regards to big pharma, I mean, I've been a big advocate of a lot of things that people on the left have been, in regards to legalizing marijuana. I've had Adam Scorgi on about the war on drugs. I've had Chris Bell on about to help promote his documentary on Kratom, and all this stuff. So it's like, I'm like, and all of a sudden, like, people who were normally, I felt like, were on my side fighting for those same things, because we know big pharma are criminals and just over prescribing pills and possibly harming and killing a lot of people because of it, and knowingly in many cases. And yet, like, all of a sudden, it's like the right's the one that's fighting for for big pharma. And I'm like, well, what the hell happened? All of a sudden, I'm like staying in the same place, but the people standing with me just change. Same thing with like my body, my choice. I am very liberal in regards to that perspective. This idea that women should have absolutely the right to do with what they want to do with their body. But I also think me as a parent should decide if my kid needs to get a mandated vaccine, or if I as adult need to get a mandated vaccine. Like, this is my body, my choice. It's like, so it's funny, like you know, and this kind of goes back to what you were saying. These ideas and these conversations are much more complex. It's, you can simplify it by saying, I join this team, I defend them in all other aspects. And in Europe, where you're from, Italy, and where you know, where I didn't grow up, but where I'm from in Portugal, I mean, we have multiple political parties, which makes much more sense, because humans thinking shouldn't be so simple that you can agree with one of two parties on every issue all the time. Like, if you do that, then I don't have much to talk to you about, because you're not a very interesting person and you're not thinking for yourself.
Yeah, even better would be to have no parties at all, right? To just have individuals run as individuals, and you study their platform and what they are arguing. Not because ultimately, again, with a party, you're going to have to make compromises in order to make sure everybody sticks together, because we have the enemies to fight, kind of thing. And just, you know, you are going to look at an individual, they're going to have 100 stances, figure out how many you agree with, how important they are to you, and run from there, you know.
Yeah, but do we live in like a monarchy and not even know it? I joke around about this all the time about, like, we have disguised kings and queens as politicians, and we don't we still live in a monarchy. We don't, I mean, it's the same political families, you know, it's the same. I mean, Kissinger worked with Republicans and Democrats. You know, you think you know, it's like they're all friends. It's, you know, when I had Jesse Ventura on, he said it many of times in interviews where, you know, it's like pro wrestling. You know, you're watching it on TV, and you know, and you think Andre the Giant and Hulk Hogan hate each other, and they're, you know, drinking backstage, you know, friends, and knowing it's all theater. I mean, and the other thing too is, like, you know, people have been saying, you know, all empires fall, all empires fall. I think when they're in the process of falling, sometimes people don't believe it can happen to, you know, to their country, or during this time. Like, for some reason, we're immune to a revolution, we're immune to empire falling. I mean, what's your thoughts on all that?
I mean, no, of course we're not. You know, it's like, I mean, the trajectory of United States power is in dramatic decline, and it's pretty obvious. And it's and again, the question is, for example, that's a perfect example, right? If you look at American foreign policy has been awful for longer than I can remember, and yet doesn't mean that the destruction of American empire mean that something better is going to come up. You know, if China become the next global superpower, I don't know that you're making a great trade. You know, I don't know. And I feel that that's where,
They've never invaded a country, right? I mean, they've done very little invasion compared to
well,
the US.
Tibetans would disagree, right? But, you know, it's like you have that. I think the problem is, in any system that's not a tribal system, where it's local level, face-to-face communication, fairly widespread power and wealth spread across the tribe, once society get big enough, they are built on inequality. They are built on unequal access to wealth and power. They are built on the fact that the game is by nature become rigged by whoever has the power, make all the choices to make sure to keep it, and vice versa. That's just the nature of the game. You go throughout history, throughout societies. I think you can have some societies where they are less shitty than others, but I don't know that you find a political system and you're like, those guys had it made. That was great, man. I wish I could live under that political system. It's more like, it almost feels like a US election. Do you want this flavor of crap or this flavor that's actually a lot worse? Doesn't feel like it when you're tasting flavor A, because flavor A really sucks, but flavor B managed to be even worse. That's kind of the political game for you. You know, that's
When you're studying history, is that something you take in consideration for doing your podcast? You know, History on Fire, and really, I guess, just researching stuff throughout the years. Obviously, you're very big into history, and so am I, because I think we can learn from it. But something I've always thought about is, okay, whose perspective of this historical event am I reading,
for
and
sure.
whose influence is influencing this perspective? I mean, it's almost like, if we lived now, for example, the COVID 19 or 2020, I almost said COVID 1984, but in 2020, this COVID year, we uh, a lot of stuff has been scraped off the internet. I mean, I've been censored on iTunes when I had Del Bigtree on. I've been censored, when I had Mickey Willis on, who did the Plandemic documentary. I talked to him for 3 hours. I think it was a great way of getting to know who he is and his whole situation, motivations, and all that stuff. I think it's really hard to bullshit somebody when you talk to somebody for that long and you kind of get an idea who somebody is. And these are just conversations with people, and it's being scraped off the internet. So many doctors who just happen to have second opinions, which if you had an injury doing martial arts or I had an injury doing, playing soccer or basketball or whatever it may be, it's not uncommon for doctors to have a second opinion. And yet, the internet, YouTube, Twitter, Facebook, they've said that no, like we're deciding what truth is for you, and we're going to force feed you that and not let you hear second opinions because we've decided that that's dangerous. So looking back, and I guess just to finish off this rant before it goes any longer, looking back, if I was doing research, like if I'm my kids, for example, and they get to my age and they're looking back doing research, a lot of those alternative perspectives, those alternative opinions are going to be much harder, if not impossible to find compared to the mainstream narrative. And do you think that's the case in almost all aspect of researching history?
Pretty much. I mean, it's just history is written by the winners kind of story, right? So you're gonna have to dig. You can find stuff, but it's gonna be harder, Like the entire history of the Roman Empire, you have not a one line written by a slave about their own slavery experience. You're talking tens of millions of people, not one line. That's how it is, it's the game. But that's why, to me, in fact, I find it extremely important to shift a little bit emphasis in terms of where you put your energy. Much more, not that you should be disinterested in politics, but to put a much more emphasis on the personal, on what you can actually affect, and what how far does your reach extend? How can you touch people in your life? How far? And focus a whole lot of energy on that. And again, if you have 100 energy, put some on a global level, but realistically on a global level, you can scream until the cows come home and probably nothing is going to make a difference in what you're doing. So realistically, you're probably wasting your energy. You should still try some level because again, all change only happens if people try to some degree. But in terms of where you allocate your energy, your kids, your friends, your family, your neighborhood, maybe your town, if you really want to get ambitious, or some particular issue. You want to make sure that spot that you love doesn't get polluted or something, Maybe you want to be political at that level. That you actually there's a return for your investment. The amount of energy that you put into it has some chance of leading to an outcome that you find desirable. I find it not very productive to put a fuckload of energy into something where the odds that you're going to get the outcome you want are minimal or non-existent. And okay, we can say it once, we can say it twice, we can have that discussion for intellectual fun once in a while, but not that many hours a day, not that much of your energy, because after you said it once or twice, you're essentially dumping in the toilet and flushing because it's achieving no practical outcome whatsoever. So I'm, in that sense, very interested in shifting on what are the things that can make life better right now. Not that can make life better if I was the world dictator and I had all the power and I could change the political, economic, religious system of the world, because that's realistically as much as I think it should happen, because I have all the good ideas. No, it's not going to happen, So it's like, how about instead I focus more of my energy on what I can do today to make life better for the people around me. And I think that tends to be, that's kind of my take on a lot of these things. That's sort of where I feel it's important to, in terms of shifting perspective. And again, I'm not advocating you should retreat in your little happy island and not be interested in what's going on in the world at large. No, I'm not saying that. But I'm saying dedicate 5% of your energy to that, 10% of your energy, not 50. And I think part of the reason why people, like if you look at a bunch of people timeline on social media, that's all they talk about, is because they feel powerless. So talking about something where it doesn't really make a difference, whatever opinion they have, and they can get all animated and mad and this and that, it's a nice safety, it's a nice release valve for the fact that in your day-to-day life, you don't feel you have any power. Your kids fucking hate your guts because you're obnoxious and you don't know how not to be. Your wife is dreaming of the day that a truck ran you over. You are, or you're lazy, you don't lack the discipline to do the things that you need to do to improve your health, your mindset, your this, your that. Or just plain bad luck. Maybe you are smart, maybe you're disciplined, maybe you have that, but you have some real major things that stand in the way of creating a good life. So it's so much easier to go on Facebook and yell about the evil people on the other side and how they are the cause of everything that's wrong in the world. I think, again, it goes back to it's a lot damn easier to sit back and yell at a bad system than it is about finding solutions, because those are hard, not just at a global level, but even on a personal level. And so I'm super interested in, if finding solution at a global level, it's insanely hard. And even if you did find them, good luck having the power to implement them. Finding solution to a personal level is still hard, but it's somewhat more manageable. And so putting more energy in that direction to me seems rather important.
Well, I think the reason why with the 2020 has brought out more vocal people, and not all cases, but in some cases, is because I remember when I first started podcasting, one thing I was always really intrigued with and passionate about was foreign policy, geopolitics, and
Sure.
it was really hard to get people who got to go to the park with their kids, out to dinner with their wives, go to work every day, and do the things that they enjoy, to get upset about what's going on over the ocean, the other side of the ocean, when it has no effect on their personal life. In many cases, not in all cases, obviously, but today this issue has seeped into our personal lives. So now it affects your ability to go out to eat with your wife. It affects your ability to bring your kid to school. It affects your ability to do anything you enjoy without feeling like it's been changed, modified, or will never be the same. And I think that's brought out a anger, a frustration, a motivation in people that I've never seen before. I've never seen. I mean, when we started podcasting and you started, like I said before, me and you probably felt the same way I felt, where I felt like I was late to the party. And now there's people, new podcasts coming up all the time, and people are like, "Oh, dude, I probably shouldn't, but I'm going to start a podcast." I'm like, listen, the more people having conversations, the better. So yeah, it's a crazy time, but I think this issue has brought out some, and I named the podcast the Ripple Effect Podcast because I truly believe that we can all start a ripple. We can all have some effect in the world. And you look at the most influential people in the world, if it's Martin Luther King, if it's whoever it may be, we know their names, but there's also a lot of people who influence them that we don't know. He could have been at a bus stop, had a really intimate conversation with an old man waiting for the bus, and just changed his whole life perspective. And growing up, you never know which conversations are going to really connect with you or going to stick with you. I mean, there's so many childhood experiences we have that you're like, I don't know why, but I remember that, or I don't know why that conversation was so important or that advice was so important, but it stuck with me. And you never, and as people having these conversations, we never know which one of those conversations are going to connect with people. So I think we should continue to have them.
No, in fact, I'm not saying we shouldn't. I'm just saying in terms of energy allocation is where you choose how much you choose. Because, you can take a good thing, something that's good to do. But if you do it 25 hours a day, it's no longer a good thing. So how much time and energy you decide to allocate in one place versus another, versus another, versus another. Because ultimately there are 24 hours in a day and you got to make choices. And so again, sort of back to what we were saying, it's not about yes or no, it's about percentages. And in my experience, I've seen it a lot lately, where I've seen people who seem to have a fairly good life, pleasant, good human beings, and I look at their stuff now, and they spend their days angry, and it's all about the other evil side that's blocking everything that's good in the world. And I'm like, I regardless of what position person A is taking, clearly something has gone wrong if you went from actually having a life to being angry all the time, and I think that's where I'm like, that's where I think we should figure out how much can we do to, as you're saying, affect positive change, maybe in an indirect fashion that way, which is important. And I think, again, I'm not in any way, shape, or form advocating we shouldn't do it, but how much of our energy we dedicate to that versus playing with your kids versus whatever the hell
That
else.
that is it's something I've said actually on the show before, because I think what you're saying is very important. We can get so caught up in being a activist or trying to create these changes, but then we forget the reason why we're motivated to do these things is because we want to have the right to enjoy life and
Yeah.
live a fulfilled life and be happy and whatever. So you get so caught up in fighting for those things that you stop
Mm-hmm.
enjoying those things. And so,
Exactly.
yeah, without a doubt, I completely understand what you're saying, because I at times find myself the same way. I'm like, I need to laugh more. I need to
Yeah.
joke more, not think about these other issues so much, because it gets in the way of me being able to enjoy whatever time I have on this planet. So, but I know you're limited on time, so I don't want to take any more of your time. Daniele, thank you so much for coming back on. You were one of my first guests back in like 2013 or 14, whenever it was, and I'm truly grateful for you and all those people that were willing to come on for whatever reason. And thank you so much. It's been a great conversation as always, and hopefully we talk again the next year, and a better year, hopefully.
That would be nice. Awesome. Thank you.
Hey, thank you, Daniele. Take care.